Yeah, dude, we can riff until midnight. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The worst thing though is now people are gonna just join this and they're like, what the hell are we talking about? So let's give an
Yeah,
introduction. Hey
sure.
everyone, welcome to this, let's call it a conversation or bros discuss. And essentially what Euwyn and I are gonna do. So firstly, my name is Rahul. And we've got Euwyn Go. We're just gonna discuss really sensibly simple topics, but not really once we get into the crux of things. And today we're going to discuss why get married. So two single bros discuss why get married. Ewan, I'll probably, oh wait, before I post a question to you, I've got a quick thing I wanted to say before, which is before we started recording, I was like, hey, look, I want to capture this. Um, because I was running and then I was thinking about like, oh, this is an interesting topic. What are like my views on the matter? It's something I think I've been thinking a lot more about love over marriage. So, but for me, those things are essentially the same. Like I don't really see a huge delineation between the two. But what I
Mm.
thought was, I feel like you and I have, in so much of our worldview, we have similar conclusions. Although I do think that doesn't mean we agree on everything, but I do think we arrive at these conclusions, and these conclusions are obviously not absolute, but at least our current state of mind, our current stance on things, sometimes perhaps rather differently. So I thought it would be interesting to flesh out today marriage and like why we both, I think we all both agree
Yeah.
that marriage is a good thing and that why it's good to get married and why we both want to get married, if to no one else, to each other at least.
Indeed, indeed.
But anyway, dude, enough. Okay, I'm being long-winded here. So yeah, Ewan, mate, why get married?
Oh, well, that's the loaded question for today, right? That we're trying to parse through.
Yeah.
Uh, well, I guess if I were to start with the thought, and this is something I've been thinking about recently, because it's one of those things where you kind of encounter it every single day, right? You meet a married couple, you meet someone who's going to get married soon, you meet someone who's not wanting to be married anytime soon or at any time in the foreseeable future. And so everyone has kind of their stance on marriage and everyone has their own marital status. It's the question government forms ask for. So it's very much something that's prevalent in like everyone's daily lives, right? It's like something super practical and no one is alienated to. I think one interesting like backdrop behind modernity, which we're all a part of, is that marriage essentially has lost the uh religious
Dimension.
core within it,
Mm.
right? Because initially, what is marriage? Like two shall be united into one, till death shall we part. And all of these are kind of very religious. They're backed by very religious precepts. Like, for example, two becomes one under the eyes of God. You're kind of united. And then there's all the Christian notions of, or Abrahamic religious notions of like not divorcing or, staying like struggling together and kind of, basically two being one, right?
They're metaphysical claims.
Metaphysical claims, pretty much. And it's like it's a creed. Like it's not your choice. Like it's
Yeah.
you kind of get together, two is one, and then like good luck with that kind of thing. So figure that out. And so right now, I like the context, that's something I think that's very interesting, is that since marriage has lost this religious underpinning, it's kind of become something else. And what this is right now, we can discuss. But like in my circles, for example, one sense I get is like marriage is something one does out of aesthetic choice. Like maybe they like the idea of a wedding. And I had a tweet before I tweeted, like something along the lines of like, why do people still marry? Because one of my
Sure.
comments.
Sorry, can I interrupt you there?
Oh,
So
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
just to like interrupt there, when you mean aesthetic, I think obviously you and I, because we both love Kierkegaard, we kind of get what that
Yeah.
means. Maybe if you could flesh out, because I know that you talk a lot
Oh,
about
yeah, yeah. Sure.
well,
And what is
flesh out what
I'm
aesthetic.
getting there, because so I mean it in a very shallow sense. It's like
Okay.
not
Oh,
even
okay. So not even Kierkegaard. Gotcha.
like,
Gotcha. Gotcha.
for
Okay.
example, so that's what I was getting, like this tweet I sent out a while back. I was like, my commentary was like, I am more surprised that people still marry and abide by these conventions, like as opposed to just do away with it altogether and like, I don't know, like in a, you know, the Huxleyan Brave New World kind of world, just like have sex with everyone, right? Like everyone is kind of open to everyone. Like it's more interesting to me that people still abide by like monogamous conventions, marriage and all of those. I find that very interesting why people still do that. But like when I posted that tweet, someone's comment was like, because it's fun, you know, a wedding is like a celebration of a relationship. And so, you know, these are kind of the replies that come back from, you know, just people that follow me or interact with me. And they're all right now just kind of the keywords I tend to get are like, it's a celebration, or it's a this and that. But that's kind of, you know, there's not a clear metaphysical like underpinning in that, at least to the degree that there was, say, 100 years ago.
Well, I mean, at least consciously. I mean, maybe. Yeah, I mean, consciously, I don't believe. Yeah, you're right. I certainly do agree that in modernity, there is no metaphysical scaffoldings that justify marriage. In fact, you and I could probably. It's interesting to, like, in a Hegelian dialectical sense, make a whole episode or a whole conversation on why not to get married. Because in fact, I would say.
Okay, wait. So I'm going to stop you there. So I feel like if we're going to talk about something very practical, we're talking about love and marriage. Let's try and like explain all of the words. So what the heck do you like Hegelian dialectic?
So very interesting. Okay. So Hegel's dialectics. My God, man. How do I explain this?
You want to start with this?
It's generally look. Hegel's dialectics encompass many things. People talk about things like negation, negativity, but for the purpose of a conversation, I'll put it this way. A dialectic is generally, so we're talking about marriage, right? So we have the thesis of get married, and then we have an antithesis of not get married, let's say. And those two things are at contradiction, at conflict, they're at contradiction, and they're at this sort of antagonism with each other. However, it's very important. The bastardized version of dialectics is that, oh, we have get married, not get married, and then suddenly we have a synthesis, and then it's beautiful. We have this new conclusion. That's not the case. Hegel never said that. It was Victor who spoke about the synthesis. But when I mean a dialectical, for all intents and purposes, it generally means when we assert something, we have its negative too that we bring on to the positive. So when we're talking about why get married, in that conversation should also be why not get married, if that makes sense. So as in, we don't do the thesis why get married justice by not bringing in why not get married into that conversation. I'll put it that way. Okay, caveat. There are many Hegel scholars that are going to, they're not even Hegel scholars, people who just read a lot of Hegel are going to say what I just said is bullshit. So take what I say with a grain of salt. That is my current understanding as a idiot on what Hegelian dialectics are. But hey, look, if you do want to learn about dialectics, read Hegel's Science of Logic. And I've only just started reading that, so bear with me. But now where was I going to go? Okay, so responding to your question, Euwyn, you made a good point, man. Like I agree. I think, in fact, I would even say it's not even like a modern phenomena. Like modernity, we would describe modernity. A lot of people think of modernity like post-internet in like a colloquial sense, but really modernity starts with like Virginia Woolf. It starts in the 20th century with like James Joyce, those kind of thinkers. And in fact, you know what? I would even go back further. I think it's post-Kant with like the Enlightenment. That's modernity, right? So, and then some people would even go and say Socrates was he drew the chain, he drew like the pathway for modernity. But okay, we're getting too abstract here. Back to the topic. What I was thinking was, it's really interesting because, firstly, consciously, I don't think can justify marriage in any. I don't want to say rational because that's a loaded term. I think there are rational reasons to get married for sure, but in the sense that in like we can make we can have a set of axioms that say marriage is sacred. It's a like a almost like a metaphysical communion, or not a metaphysical, like a spiritual communion you have with God or the transcendent. we don't have any of it anymore. No one really, even I would even argue that, and this is okay, I'm gonna piss some people off here. Even so-called Christians, people who proclaim to be Christians, don't really believe that in their marriage. Like they would even declare it, but I think unconsciously there's like this, their belief itself has some unbelief, I would argue, though that's very presumptuous of me to say. So, but the other thing is this though, for me, and again, I'm pulling a little Hegelian trick there, the lack of that metaphysical scaffoldings, or the fact that we don't have any reasons in that sense to get married, is a good thing. And that's really, so my thesis is that the fact that we have no kind of metaphysical reason to get married, and I know we're using this word a lot. What I mean by that is that an absolute reason to get married, absolute in the sense of it's not evolutionary, it's not based on our biology or any kind of physical things that we can empirically prove via science, but rather it's like a truth claim. We're saying if we say marriage is good, that's a metaphysical claim. It doesn't rest on any evolution or whatnot. And my thesis is that we don't have that anymore, and therefore we it's a good thing. And I'm going to do a disgusting narcissistic thing now. I'm sorry, mate, but I know you'll still love me. I'm going to read out from my own essay because I have some structured thoughts there. I just pulled it up while you were talking. Here's what I've said, right? So this is from an essay I wrote. I just said this. Thanks to freedoms fought for by feminists, women can now participate in the workforce and broader society. Therefore, they aren't reliant on men for their livelihood. So that's like a social claim. Notwithstanding the myriad catastrophes capitalism has created, it has been an economic system that's liberated women, or at least equally made them slaves to the neoliberal hegemony, much like men. So I'm just talking about the fact that thanks to feminism, we in fact have equality, at least the equality to be slaves to capitalism. And socially, so okay, now this is the important bit. Here's where I'm kind of talking about the what we discussed, the metaphysical claims. And socially, due to secularity, we don't have religious institutions, qua religio-cultural norms pressuring us to get married or be monogamous. In fact, conventional bourgeois marriage and its concomitant expectations are dead. So that's monogamy. Opening up ground for practicing different forms of love that start from a substanceless void where we get married or be in a relationship purely out of choice. That bit there, I've said this, but later on I even challenged that, so I'm not going to go there, but we'll discuss that too. I don't think it's always a choice. I think it's a bit more complicated. Anyway, I'll keep going. And I hope, since love cannot be outsourced to the Lacanian big other, here's what I was talking about, that the metaphysical claim, i.e. religion, culture, history, biological procreation, etc., anymore. We take radical responsibility for our decision and treat love, or for our conversation, marriage, as a metaphysical project. So that's okay. I'll end my little bit there. Anyway, what do you think, man?
Yeah, no, that's interesting, and your essay is amazing. So please feel free to keep quoting from it. You know, I hugely appreciate you writing it, and I'm so excited about the full thing coming out.
I feel the love, brother.
Kudos to you for that. That's an interesting one. I think my mind was going to the big other, right? That's used to be religion, culture, whatever. I might argue that it actually hasn't really changed.
Oh, the big other is still there.
The big other is definitely, I mean, especially from a marriage point of view, because, you know, in the past, perhaps it's something more dogmatic, like, actually, I don't even know if that's changed, but like, it's more of religious dogma, let's say, right? You enter into life, you know, as part of the stages of life by Christian doctrine or whatever, you know, you enter into a certain stage where it's time for you to start basically thinking about family. Because I mean, it's like the roles of a father, a son, you know, a daughter, a mother, a husband, a wife. These are roles that are very concrete within the religious dogmas, right? Within the modern world, I just think it's maybe it's lost its religious element, but it's still very much cultural dogma, I guess. And I guess that's, culture perhaps is downstream from religion, because
I
like
agree.
Western culture, Eastern culture, they have all of these
Absolutely.
concepts. Even though now we kind of say and we think we're entirely divorced
Yeah,
from religion.
and sorry, I'm interrupting. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Bad
yeah,
habit.
yeah, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
That's why I said. That's why I said. At least consciously, we don't have metaphysical claims,
That's
but
right. That's right.
because
That's
we
right.
are in a culture, and there's the other, the big other. It's not like
That's
we
right.
escape it. So anyway, keep going.
Yeah. So like big other right now, you could say it's evolved from religious dogma to a kind of smaller version, a
Yeah,
cultural
oh
dogma,
man, I
right?
would say it's capitalism. It's neoliberal capitalism, and we can even. I even have examples as to how marriage has been subsumed into capitalism. So I'll let you finish, and if you want, I can dive into that.
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure. But essentially, like, so marriage is still very much dogmatic within the culture we live today. It's like, we meet people, we're like, are you seeing someone? It's such a basic thing, but that presumes that, the structures of getting together with and marriage and, the family institution is still very much prevalent within our culture. Even though we're like, you say this, you say that, this still exists. It's still cultural dogma that we live by. And so I guess the question, like, as you posit, right, it's kind of less so that this still exists and this still is a cultural phenomena. It's more that people still, like, by choice, come into it, right? They're like, even when they are encountered with the choice of, hey, I can go against the cultural dogma and like rebel, and a lot of people do that. Like, I'm not going to get married. I refuse to do this. I refuse to abide by conventions of family, refuse to identify as any of those roles, and I will never get married. I'll just, whatever, maybe sleep around and, or just do whatever for life, right? There's definitely lots of people, I think you and I know, who do that, and that's what they choose to do. On the other hand, there's still the choice to go into it where you kind of, without having a sense of true belief, of a deep belief in these conventions, you still jump into it for some reason. And so it's kind of interesting, I guess, to unpack that reason why, for me, like, why do people still consciously jump into such a convention, even though they don't have a clear, let's say a rational reason why they should? Because I think that's probably, the case for most people nowadays. It's like, why did you like get together with someone? Because I love him or I love her. Why did you marry? And then, like, oh, why these structures specifically? Why not, why are you marrying? Like, these are all questions where I feel like alluding to my Twitter post earlier, where people kind of answer more surface level answers, like, I married her and we did a wedding because, it was a celebration of our relationship and it was fun and it was, and it was this, it was that. But I don't think we've actually got the heart of why people get together, why two become one, and why we do all of this at all, right? And it is a very complicated topic in a way, because it's kind of, it's something that's so deep, that's so kind of constant within, the everyday relations, everyday perceptions, that you kind of have to kind of dig deep to uncover it. But yeah, that's kind of.
Well, I got two questions, right? I got two questions. Firstly, the thing about you, that's an interesting thing, because for me, I mean, I come more from like a romantic angle, right? So
Yeah.
I don't know. I personally, a lot of people that I talk to, at least, yeah, even like my close friends. I mean, well, obviously not you, but you're the exception. Is that they say they don't want to get married. Actually, my best mates all want to get married, but everyone else I kind of know, they don't want to get married. It's really interesting. So like you, and then like Sal, he certainly does. So uh okay, anyway, sorry, two things, right? First thing is that thing about why people still get married, why people still partake in these things. Do you think that's the I got the quote while you were talking, is the quote by Camus in The Fall, where he says, of course, true love is the exception, roughly 2 or 3 instances a century. The rest of the time, it's a case of vanity or boredom. As in, we all come to a point in life where, like, what the hell do I do? Like, there's like, as in, people just get bored, and then they're like, oh, I'm with this person, we're shacking it up, I'll just, I'll just marry this person. It's like, or be in like a, what's it called, cohabitate. I'll just be with this like de facto relationship or whatnot. As in, it's not even a really something it's not something they intentionally, like they would never do what we're doing. They would never theorize and analyze marriage. It's just they kind of go with it because this is what people do. And we humans, in fact, a lot of our lives is we just go with it. We just go along. We never really question. And that's good, because if we had to do this every single time, we, Kierkegaard, paralysis by analysis, dizziness by freedom. I mean, it'd be insane. And the second thing is, while you were talking, I was just thinking, mate, maybe because like what you and I are doing really is we're theorizing metaphysically in some sense on marriage, right? Not just metaphysically, but we're theorizing on marriage. But I wonder if we need to delineate the institution of marriage as a social institution, and then more of marriage as, I don't know, at like a religious level or metaphysical level, the kind of perhaps the parts that you and I are more interested in, where it's not even really an institution per se. Like I don't care about the legal institution of marriage. That means nothing to me. It's more of, let's say, the symbolic or metaphysical aspects of marriage that what I care about. So anyway, those are my two. First one is a question about, do you think it's just like vanity or boredom? Or the second one is, what are your thoughts on separating the two? And keep in mind though, even though I'm saying this, I don't even know if we can, I've been reading a lot of Hegel, whether we can like easily just like be like, oh, institution. It's not simple. It's not like, people like to say, right? I'm a Christian. Like I'm one of those people where I say, oh, I'm a Christian, I have faith, whatnot, but I don't like the church. I don't like the institution. I don't think you can simply just break the two like that. It doesn't work like that. So anyway, those are a few.
Well, I do think they're all kind of relations as well, right? So like, when you mentioned that, I think the second question kind of, I think what I'm thinking right now kind of addresses the first as well, but vanity or boredom, it's a question of, I think, the relations, I think, like you say. And so there's the institution of marriage as a social phenomena, and then there's marriage, metaphysical marriage, I guess that's the religious.
No, I mean, call it that. Yeah,
sure. And I think that is kind of also juxtaposed against love itself in a way, because like I think you can view love as a standalone aside from the concepts of marriage, right? Would you agree with that?
What do you mean by I mean independent to the
you can view love independently.
I agree. Like for me, for me, marriage is that's why I kind of said that when I think of marriage, I essentially think of love. Like for me, I don't even care about marriage per se. What I care about is more of what marriage entails if that marriage is undergirded by love. As in, I think that's right. I could, in my worldview, I could still be married to a person and never officially or have a wedding or do the whole thing, that the bourgeois thing where you go through the whole process and get married. Like for me, I'm thinking more of what that would existentially entail to be married and then have that undergirded by love, and why we should perhaps do it. It's a good thing.
Yeah. No, that's right. And I think so. Love, I see it as this independent force almost. There's no real concrete way to describe it. It's a force. And I kind of see marriage as to do with the development of love, right? The development of this force one to another. And I must like to be specific right now. We're talking about specifically, the eros kind of love, or, the action of one person to another romantically, right? We're not talking about the love between a father and a son, or a friend to a friend.
This is a drawback of the English language, because like obviously the love that I have for you is different to the love I'll have for my wife, if I do have a wife in the future, or the love that I have for my family. But it's nonetheless, it's still love. It's just, let's call it different manifestations, different variants of it.
That's right. But it's also, I guess it's interesting that specifically this form of love, the union between two into one, the eros, romantics / sensual kind of love, it's this one that is so developed in terms of how its stages or how its development should look like. It's got the initial courting stage, and then you get engaged, and then you get married, and then you kind of go ever after. I don't know. I'm not saying the happily word because that's quite. I don't really like that.
Yeah, I know, man. It's corny. You and I we have a problem with happiness, right?
We have a problem with happily, yeah.
Yeah, that's
ever after. I don't know, but so that's very interesting that there's so much emphasis on development for this specific one type of love. So now the question, I guess, is like for me, right? Like, why is it that this love specifically requires such development? Why can't it remain like, because what do we watch in the movies, right? Like you quoted, I think, in your essay, Jack and Rose in Titanic.
Yeah.
Like all of movies pretty much stop at the point where the movie finishes, they cut, you assume they live happily ever after. What do you watch for? You watch the kind of butterflies in your stomach, everything is like heavily romanticized. And obviously, like that's the word, right? Romantic, you romanticize love. It's a romantic thing. And then it's like, why does it develop further? Like, why does marriage come in? Because marriage, I don't think marriage is really a part of, like, maybe sure, the wedding happens, but you very rarely see the kind of the wedded life go past, like in a movie, if it's a coming of age movie. Most of the time, romantic movies are love coming of age.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's that show on Netflix. I didn't watch it, but Marriage Story. Some conservatives didn't like it. Yeah, conservatives didn't like it because it talks about divorce and whatnot. But that's stupid. Conservatives are idiots. But like I do think it's because it's an event. And okay, I think you perhaps have pretty much brought this conversation to the most important point. This is it. Like, why is it that, like, for example, why aren't you and I discussing, bros discuss friendship? People, friendship is important.
Exactly.
But it's not something that requires this kind of, because of course friendship entails love, but it's not, I don't know, for some reason, at least maybe I'm just naive, but for me, I don't think that friendship requires this kind of analysis and critique the way marriage does. I don't know why that is. And that's why I think you brought up, this is what you've just posited is the question. I have a few things. Like I have a few ways I think I can come at this. And then I'll let you go. So let me know what you think. Firstly, I don't agree. I know it's a very Christian notion that marriage is to become one. My view is very much marriage, yes, is to come together, but when they come together, they don't lose their subjectivity. Their infinite subjectivity still exists. However, there certainly is a kind of like a shattering or like this violent shift of their subjectivity. And that shifts towards, once you fall in love and you assume the fall and then you choose to do the work of love, that's where for me the one starts. The one is not where they become that, they build another truth, a higher truth. So love is a project. And obviously I get this from, as you know, Alain Bajot in his book, In Praise of Love. Therefore, I don't particularly agree with the two become one, because I'll tell you what, right, this is actually a very theoretical reason. If two becomes one in marriage is nothing. It's easy. It's simple. It's like we shouldn't be having this conversation, because what two become one, what we tacitly mean by that is that I don't need to treat my partner as the other, as someone who is in fact mysterious to me, even though I know this person deeply, the person I know the most to the most depth in my life. When we say it's two become one, it's like, oh, he or she or whoever they, my God, man, fuck it, he or she should know me, or this person is, I mean, you should know what I want. No, but that's unfair, because that's the ideology of two become one. But if we always think that the two subjects do remain in their subjectivity, in their infinite subjectivity, we always have that respect. I would even call it respect, to treat our partner as a different, distinct individual person who is in fact the other to us. It's not like this person, we subsume this person or they subsume us. However, it doesn't mean that the other is just this free floating entity, the way, like, for example, Sartre thought, a transcendental consciousness that's just there, out there, living their life. No, it's still, there's a project, there's something happening there. There's an event, as Alain Bajot would put it. And this is something, I think I got this from Todd McGavin. I don't know where. So he said that even a divorce is an event. If falling in love and getting married, all of that is an event, the end of the love is also an event. It's a different kind of event. So both these things, falling in love, being in love, and God forbid it ends, is also an event. It disrupts our subjectivity. So that's the first point. The second point is, man, here's what I would say. That I think this is why I even though I identify a lot with Hegel, I still, well, Hegel is a romantic. I still believe that I'm a pathetic, hopeless, incurable romantic here. Love is ultimate to the point where, that's why I believe love is violent, love is mundane. There's nothing that affects our subjectivity like love. There's nothing that shakes us or disrupts us like love. And perhaps above all, I don't know, I know there's like agape and all the, that kind of love, but I think the highest form is eros. Not that it's hierarchical, but in terms of how palpable, how intense it is, it's eros. It's romantic love. And which is why, to use my favorite character from literature, not character, I would say my favorite love story in literature, it's Wuthering Heights. It's between let me pull up Catherine Earnshaw and Heathcliff, right? So for me, their love story, if you read Wuthering Heights, man, I'm like, this is, nowadays they'd both be sent to therapy, they'd be under counseling. It's like they'll be called, what is it, pathological love, toxic relationship, all of that, right? So here's a line from Wuthering Heights, and Emily Bronte is just a genius. She's a literary genius, right? So it goes like this: if all else perished and he remained, I should still continue to be. And if all else remained and he were annihilated, the universe would turn to a mighty stranger. I should not seem a part of it. My love for Heathcliff resembles the eternal rocks beneath. I'll read that again. My love for Heathcliff resembles the eternal rocks beneath, a source of little visible delight, but necessary. Nellie, I am Heathcliff. So this is Catherine saying that. He's always, always in my mind, not as a pleasure, any more than I am always a pleasure to myself, but as my own being. So it's clear by her violently falling in love with Heathcliff has affected her subjectivity. Like she literally says, he's always, always in my mind, not as a pleasure. So that's why I do think the problem, my critique, and we can get into that, this kind of, these disgusting, messed up, misogynistic even terms, things like sexual marketplace, relationship market. I hate those terms because it misses the fact that we are human subjects, that we are subjects, and that when you fall in love, when the event takes place, our subjectivity is shattered. However,
though, is the essence of love.
Yeah, totally. It totally does. And however, though, that's not all love is, and that we can get to a bit later. So, but yeah, so that's kind of two ways how I'd answer your question about why it's worth discussing and analyzing what marriage is over, like, let's say, friendship. Because one, I do think it's something that disrupts our subjectivity, and two, there's a reason we say we fall in love, and in French, tomber amoureux, because it's in fact a fall. It's out of our choice. We fall. And that is something that happens. It's not something you can put in an algorithm, or you can analyze, or you could theorize about. It is something that in fact happens.
Yeah, well, beautifully put, man.
Lot to say, man. Sorry.
So to break it down, right? You mentioned the first one was kind of to do with the construction of love, and the second one, let's say, was the ultimacy of love. And so to go back to the construction bit that you mentioned earlier, just to kind of address that, when we discuss two become one, I think where you're coming at is two uniting into one as a construction of a worldview. And Correct. That's a a Bajo
Absolutely.
Bajoin.
Yeah.
It's a
Bajo,
uh,
Bajo.
that's a
Bajoian.
Bajoin. It's a term. It's
Yeah.
a concept that Bajo wrote, right, in his
Yeah.
book,
Yeah.
Praise of
You
Love.
keep talking. I'll just get
Beautiful
up.
book.
Yeah.
Beautiful book. Thanks for your recommendation, Rahul.
So it's called In Praise of Love by Alain Bajo. Yeah.
Yeah. And so basically it's like, there's one subjective individual and one subjective individual, and what they do in a development of love is they construct a worldview, and in that sense, two become one. They learn to see from the perspective of two, which is what
That's
he
correct.
says.
Absolutely.
So I would kind of differentiate the notion of two become one from the marriage perspective, though, because I think that's kind of the construction of a worldview. And I would say the two become one in the marriage sense, the one that's born of Christianity. It's kind of and I agree with you. It's like when a man and a woman or whoever, gets married, they haven't necessarily arrived at the point where the two subjective individuals have both united into one, or like neither of them are able to see from the perspective of two quite yet, because that's what it's called, a construction, right? It's a construction of the worldview that needs to happen over time and effort. I think in the Christian marriage sense, or religious, the two become one is kind of because where it comes from is two become one under God, right? And so that's the very important kind of third entity involved, let's say, or the uniting entity involved, two become one under God. And I think to me what that means, and like I can't really speak authoritatively in this, so I probably screwed that word up, but because I haven't arrived there yet, but like from my understanding of it, it's like the notion of two uniting into one under God. It's kind of the idea of committing to the duty of constructing the worldview. Do you know what I mean? Because
but I think I exactly get what you mean. Yeah. Sorry.
Because like the construction of one, that's kind of love's development into the worldview, both individuals being able to see from the point of view of two. That requires commitment. And I'd say what marriage is a commitment to that commitment, that over life or death, over, whatever the world throws at us, whatever happens, we are committed to constructing this thing.
Yeah. It's an act of faith.
It is an act of faith, very much. And I think that's one that's very much marked by this statement, to become one under the eyes of God. We are now in duty. We now have a duty to each other that kind of subsumes everything else, almost. To me, that's what to become one under the eyes of God means. That's the union of marriage, and construction happens within or upon that.
I've got a question. When we make that commitment, and I 100% agree with you there, despite being an agnostic Christian, totally different conversation. I do think the commitment itself, existentially speaking, is necessary for one to be in love. Although my question is, this is a weird one, man, because is it a commitment we make before we fall in love, as a kind of like a claim we take on to ourselves? Like you and I right now, I'm single. I know you're single, because if not, you tell me. Is that it's funny, right? We both I've fallen in love deeply once, perhaps even twice. Second one, not so sure. Is that it's like, do we make that commitment after the fall? So post hoc? Or is it something that we kind of, it's like, for example, I think you and I would agree that we are like, okay, I'm not gonna lie. I'm gonna try my best to not lie and be truthful. So that's kind of something that we hold on, right? We're like, it's kind of like an axiom we base our life upon. We fail sometimes, whatnot. So do you think the commitment is made after the fall, or it's just something individuals hold on to themselves as individuals?
Yeah. Well, so I think this is the key concept as well. The other big hole that we've opened, I guess, pertaining to marriage and why we still do it, or why we should do it. I think it's the question of duty, right? Why should one have a duty to another, or a thing, or a God? It's all very much the same kind of idea, right? You have duty to something else. You're responsible for something
Beyond
else
yourself.
beyond yourself.
And
Exactly.
this is completely antithetical to the post-enlightenment modernity, where it's all about
Yes.
rights and freedoms, right?
Yeah, and that's also kind of really, in a way, in contrast to the whole aesthetic side of love, right? Because that's what we kind of spoke about. And earlier, your point number 2, that was the ultimacy of love, right? It's like love, excuse me, love is a pure force, let's say, that draws one to another, that it draws so, intensely.
I mean, to a destructive level. Of course, we know love can be destructive, right? People have, as Schopenhauer said, people have gone insane and even committed suicide over love. So it certainly is destructive.
Yeah. I think there was what Plato or one of the ancient Greeks.
Love is a madness. Love is madness. Love is madness.
Something like that. Yeah. And so that there is that kind of overwhelming force that comes into the picture when you fall into love. But then this is, as kind of to go back to the analogy that I mentioned earlier, and that came from your essay, which is, Jack and Rose fall into love on the Titanic. They go, doing all of their love shenanigans and escaping and, dreaming and this and that.
Mate, they were begging on the Titanic. I would do that too, bro. I mean, if I was on the Titanic.
Exactly. But what was it said? This is best coming from you. But it is.
I mean, look, it's not Jacquin insight, so I just reappropriated it. Can I read out the
please
the para?
The part where you kind of go from that to the next, right? If they did,
it goes like this. It's not that long, so I can read it out quickly. In James Cameron's Titanic, the actual test of Jack's, Leonardo DiCaprio, and Rose's, Kate Winslet's love would be if the ship never sank. Then the affair would continue. The ship would reach New York, and as Rose passionately says, she will leave with him, Jack, preferring a poor life with her true love to the false, corrupted life among the rich. At this moment, the ship hits the iceberg in order to prevent what would undoubtedly have been the true catastrophe, namely the couple's life in New York, or in our case, Melbourne, very similar cities. And one can safely guess that soon the misery of everyday life would destroy their love. The catastrophe thus occurs in order to save their love, in order to sustain the illusion that if it were not to happen, they would have lived happily forever after. So the iceberg, which seemed like an obstacle, in fact, saved the love affair by not letting the typical 20th century bourgeois life challenge their love. Of course, if the miracle of love were to exist, though, the young lovers would take onto themselves their mistake, the transgressions of legitimate sex and crossing the class divisions, and despite their stark differences, patiently build a new life together without the excitement of a clandestine love affair on a ship, not just any ship, but the Titanic.
Well, first of all, sublimely written, man. Like, it just I keep thinking about it.
Always appreciate the love.
Yeah. But yeah, so exactly. So like that's the kind of catastrophe which you posit, right? It's the catastrophe of love, because love dies in a very interesting way. Like, you get the intensity of love, the ultimacy of love kind of makes itself known to the two people involved in this case. And then what happens then is there comes a point where that, dries out, or, that doesn't, the falling into love, you kind of stand back up and you've no longer, you kind of come to your senses. And then this is where kind of duty becomes a thing, right? And for me, marriage is very much kind of a marker of this duty. It's like, we have fallen in love with each other. Now we are committing to each other. And we're not necessarily committing to, this same, intensity of love. It's a different kind of intensity, I think. And this is very much, when I think about, this kind of reminds me of Kierkegaard, right? Which it's the going from the aesthetic kind of love, it's purely the force of the heart, let's say, to going to the ethical and the religious, right? It's something that's higher. It's something that's permeated by duty. It's something that you commit to, and it's something that's higher in terms of how really profound and how rich it is to a human life.
I totally get your point, and I think you articulated it really well there. It makes a lot of sense. However, I think we should not undersell even the aesthetic element of the ethical life or of the life
No, I
bound
agree.
by duty, because this whole notion, it's a complete ideological lie. Again, thanks to capitalism, because what does capitalism tell us? Superego imperative, as Zizek says, is enjoy. Always find a better person, find someone who's richer, who's more good looking, who's got bigger tits, who's got a better ass. But no, true love is saying, no, I pick out this person, and that person because of my choice is absolute. I don't need a better option. So, but the beautiful thing there is, and here's where I in fact, when I say the miracle of love were to exist, that's why I called it a miracle, because, going back to the question about modernity, dude, we've got infinite options. Like, I mean, you and I know how easy it generally is to get laid in Melbourne, right? Like, it's not that hard to date. There are dating apps. There are all these ways to go and meet people. Again, we don't live in a socially conservative. Well, at least you and I don't live in this city. It's not conservative. Like, maybe it's different in some other nations or some other countries or cultures. But the miracle of love is that from falling in love, we fully assume the fall, but we don't, to quote Todd McGovern, we don't fall into a cushy little couch where now it's over. No. We commit, and then we work on love. But in that work itself, there certainly is an aesthetic element. I mean, I can only say I've only had one long-term relationship. I mean, of course, man, I would say, apart from the past 6 months, which was tough before we broke up, the first few years were beautiful. Like, there's those like little things, man, like doing the dishes together, or just like going over to her place and just maybe when you wake up the next morning, you make her bed when I'm with her. So like there are these tiny little things that it's something you just do purely out of love, right? There's no I don't know. There's no gain. There's no ROI, to use a term I hate. But in the work of duty itself, there certainly is an aesthetic element. There certainly is, to use, let's say, a very vulgar term, a pleasure to it. You get pleasure out of it. But anyway, I just wanted to put that out.
I 100% agree with you, and I think it's very much a kind of conservative, let's say, lie or illusion. That's like, you go into marriage, it's supposed to be
Dry and boring, and then
commitment.
Yeah.
And right, you commit to each other. You kind of, whatever problems you have, you work through it. Just kind of get over it. Like, this is part of marriage life. Then you're kind of
lucky. It could be like
welcome to life, and
but still you stay with them, right? Like, it's like
exactly. And then it kind of reminds me of all the jokes about, you read the old joke books. They'll kind of joke about all the your the wife doing something dumb, or the mother-in-law, and this and that. I think it's very much a conservative like illusion. Like, say, they kind of place it on the far end where it's entirely sucked of its enjoyment, and it's entirely like as though you're in prison when you're wedded to someone. That's a very good emphasis right there. It's like, you have the aesthetic element within the ethical element, right? It's the fact that you kind of love brings you into the wholeness of its aesthetic force, and then you kind of eventually transcend is an interesting word, I'm not sure, but you kind of progress, I think, into a different kind of love, almost, where it's almost a different kind of aesthetic, but it's higher in a way. It's kind of more profound, it's deeper, it's richer. Although, and this is where this is like alluding to what I mentioned earlier, it's kind of also the important thing to admit is that it's less intense in the immediate, let's say. Right? When you are courting, you have butterflies in your stomach. And then what's the thing people always say when they get married? They're like, oh, right, you kind of, at some point you get over it. Or like, at some point you have to learn to live with the person, and like see all of his or her faults.
I mean, I would even argue on that, like, last bit, the little, like, I know you kind of made like a passing comment, but faults, I would say you love the person, in fact, because of their faults, because
exactly. But yeah, I'm kind of recounting that's what people say, right? You love them despite, you kind of just learn to deal with, or you kind of, this is all common, like, sayings that people say when they get married. They tell the younger ones, this will wear off. And so this also it is an important dimension, I think, to love. And it's like worth exploring, like, what is this element of duty that comes with marriage, like you commit to duty, and duty is something that's very alien nowadays. Like,
Oh yeah, I mean, not only alien, it's also something I think people are repelled by.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I tweeted this recently. I was like, duty to moderns is a demon. It's
Yeah,
almost and
yeah, because
yeah.
I would say though, I would say this is interesting, right? I mostly blame the church for that, because duty, it always feels like an imposition, isn't it? But I would argue the ultimate form of freedom is choosing your own master in some sense. It's like when we choose to be dutiful, when we choose to commit, we are free in that act itself. So for me, freedom doesn't just exist the way we think in modernity, that let people be, they're free. In fact, it's a worse thing, as our friend Kierkegaard, as Kierkegaard and Sartre understood. Well, you know what, man? We both have read him so much. He feels like a friend to me. You know,
he's definitely a friend.
He feels like a companion to me. In my lowest moments, when I get lonely, I've still got Kierkegaard and Euwyn. So, but the part of where was I going with this? So, yeah, in the duty, as you said, if that duty is something we do out of love, not because it's imposed societally or it's imposed, by the other, we do in fact feel the most free in that moment, I would argue.
No, I think you're right. And this is like a whole other topic, but I think it's quite incisive. Imposed by the church. It's quite incisive. I think it's the fact that it's similar to over-eager parenting, who are like, I'm gonna enforce my ways of living upon you. At some point, you invoke kind of a youthful rebellion, right? In search of their own freedom, they go against, in order to realize their potential, their capacity to search, to explore necessarily. I think it's kind of a stage of life, right? It's a stage of development. And so I think we're in that stage, kind of culturally speaking, where, we've kind of gone past the Middle Ages. We look at it with, like, we detest it. Nothing happened. Nothing happened in those 400 years. They all, they were just bad. And then now we kind of like, squirm. You think about it, and like duty is kind of this thing that you rebel against, right? Like, screw duty, I'm going to do what makes me happy. And that's what people say nowadays: do what makes you happy, right? And it's this connecting this back to marriage. It's like, why is it the case then, like, that duty, I think marriage, as I said earlier, marriage is very much a marker of duty. It's like, now we are committed to commit to each other to construct this thing. Almost, it's kind of a tongue twister, but I think that's in a way, that's very much what marriage is. You kind of lock yourself in to this construction, but this is not an easy thing. This is not an easy thing, and you kind of, by then, usually you'd have lost a lot of the, let's say, butterflies in the stomach, the kind of intensity of the aesthetic that keeps you, like, keeps you up at night. It keeps you kind of like thinking about only this one every moment. That changes. And so that's where duty comes in, where you kind of commit. And but then now what we've said recently is that there's a kind of higher, transcendent, more rich, more profound beauty in that. And that's also very interesting to unpack, because now I think with our modern aversion to duty, right, we kind of lost the understanding of that. Like, it's probably very alien for me now to say that there is a higher beauty in committing to something or someone. That's probably very alien to say. Now, there's probably many analogies, right? Like, lots of people nowadays talk about, say, committing to your, like, passion project. For example, like, you want to do what makes you happy. Like, do what you want to do, really want to do, what your soul tells you to do. I think this is very acceptable.
I think it's like, do what keeps you up at night, to the point where it's unhealthy. It's probably killing you because you're not sleeping enough. And we all have, okay, I'll put it simply in Lacanian terms, jouissance. So in simple, and again, in simple, because it's a complicated topic, for Lacan, jouissance is where you find a sense of pleasure in pain. And generally, jouissance comes in many ways. It can come in very, very negative ways, like, for example, racism or fascism, or even abuse in a relationship. But it also can come from let's say you want to write a book, and you're putting, or you're working on a startup. This is, you don't even, you like it, but you also don't like it because it's debilitating.
It's like
It uproots your life.
Camus' myth of Sisyphus is also a very good
Oh
example.
yeah,
right?
that's right. Yeah, so I mean, maybe some people know what the myth of Sisyphus is, but just for people that don't know, the uninitiated into the Camus world, what's the myth of Sisyphus?
So basically, right, the myth is where Sisyphus is kind of condemned or cursed. He's a king who rebelled against a god, and he's basically condemned to roll a stone up a mountain for eternity. So like every time he thinks he's reaching the top, he kind of goes back down. He reaches the top, he goes back down. And so basically Camus' incisive idea around this is that one must imagine Sisyphus happy.
Yeah, which is insane, right?
It is insane, but it's kind of, I think it's acceptable to say this a lot more than to say marriage is kind of beautiful nowadays. It's like, in the suffering, there is
in the struggle itself.
In the struggle itself, there is
a jouissance. There's a pleasure you get from it. Yeah.
Yes, there's pleasure, and it's the kind that's kind of higher than the immediate pleasures that you
get. Yeah. Sorry, I should reiterate. I'm not gonna say you get all you get is jouissance, because jouissance is just like it's a very psychoanalytical concept. But yeah, there's something more deeper, and let's call it more life edifying.
More life edifying. Yep. The fact that you're committed to something, a passion project or a whatever it is. And so that's kind of, I think that's very much acceptable within the current cultural worldview nowadays. Like struggle meaningfully. And this is the whole, like, the whole, what's the word? The whole discourse around work and, like, doing meaningful work, finding a career path that suits you and committing to that, stuff like that, right? But what I find interesting is the fact that, we understand this, that there's immediate pleasures of just do whatever you want, screw work, like, go hiking, go to a beach, and go traveling around the world. And many people do this, but
sometimes you have to do that, though. But sometimes you have to do that.
Sometimes you do have to do that. Exactly, that's true. Yeah. But I think people do have the innate understanding that it's like, if you committed to something that you committed something for the long game, that you would find a different kind of pleasure in that. It's just the struggle in something that you really enjoy and something that gives you pleasure.
Yeah.
You kind of, it's acceptable to say that is going to be,
it makes your life more richer,
meaningful.
More substance to your life.
It makes your life more richer. Yeah. It's more meaningful. It's more profound, this and that. People say that, okay. But then it's interesting that you kind of say this in marriage, that, initially the immediate pleasures of courting then translate onto, when you commit to this same person, you get the profoundness or the richness of playing the long game with the thing, with someone. It's kind of less, acceptable to say nowadays, in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is, because, look, I think it's a tough thing to say, man, but like it's because I'm becoming like that annoying leftist that blames everything on capitalism. But it actually, look, okay, hear my argument, right? So my argument is that it's because we view love. It's because love itself has got corrupted by capitalism. So what I mean by that is, for me, again, marriage is a manifestation or a variant of love. It is a manifestation of love. Let's say a more symbolic. It's a signifier of love. Marriage. Let's put it that way. But the thing about the way we are told how love works is we're told that it's transactional. Your partner's a commodity, and if one views love like that, of course, then marriage is useless. I mean, this perhaps is a good place, because I've got a few things I wrote it down. This perhaps is a good, like, a point to connect it to these things. Is I want to discuss the socio-political implications of marriage. And maybe with that, we could even discuss why not to get married, as marriage is understood right now. Then I kind of want to touch on, why love and marriage involves this perfect imperfections. Well, why why is it that when we get married to someone, it's not that we find the perfect person, and then that person ticks all the boxes, and then we're with that person. It's rather we find perfection in imperfection, or put it a bit more poetic way, we make the person ideal purely by our choice. The person is only ideal because we say so. It gives us the absolute authority to say this person is mine. My life depends on this person in some sense. Like in a it's a very violent thing to do to someone, but it is what it is. Very Australian thing to say. So, okay, let me ask you this: what do you think? Okay, I'll make this a bipartite question, right? Firstly, as marriage is understood in our kind of capitalistic, also like this misogynistic manosphere, where the sexual marketplace, that bullshit, right? People like what are their names? Anyway, fresh and fit, all these idiots who talk about relationships. So from that perspective, why should we in fact not get married? If that's what marriage is, I would never get married in my life. And secondly, what do you think are the sociopolitical implications and how our broader culture is affected by marriage or by not getting married?
Yeah,
That's
that's an interesting point. But sorry, repeat the first one again.
Okay, so the first one is, as marriage is understood in, okay, I'll put it in modernity, in our culture, but also how marriage is understood in this kind of transactional way where it's just this person ticks all the boxes, I tick all the boxes, I get something from that person gets something from me, and then we get together. So very transactional, right? In that case, why, if that's what marriage is, why should we not get married?
Okay.
And secondly, just in general, what do you think are the sociopolitical implications of marriage?
Yeah. Okay. Well, for the first one, that's probably not only marriage, right? It's not probably only limited to marriage. It's like the transactional kind of pervades the whole relationship from the very beginning, from before itself, right? Yeah. And so, well, okay. So earlier I kind of mentioned about duty. I actually have a few thoughts on that as well to make that a bit more clear. But now on the transactional aspect that kind of pervades how people see relationships nowadays. That's a very interesting thing, because I think that has, in the context of love itself, I think we fail to see how. That's why I think what Bajot writes was so interesting, right? That one and one, like, and such a subjective individual and another should kind of construct a worldview in union with each other, and it should be a worldview of two. And I think this is quite foreign to people nowadays when you think about that. It's like, it's like I am me and you are you, and it's this kind of an effect of the
they'll be like, oh my god, that's codependency. It's so unhealthy.
It's like the hyper individualist culture we have today, and so like people are like,
in fact, codependency is a good thing.
Yeah, true. But it's like, do what makes you happy. Do what makes you happy. And so sometimes what makes you happy is splitting apart. And that's fine. But then when you come to marriage, that's a different question, I feel like, because then you commit to a duty. But then duty is this alien thing that we kind of we are not used to at all nowadays. And so I don't know, actually, I have to kind of piece this together. But like, what gives when, in the modern terms, it feels so foreign to think about constructing a united worldview when, in our individualistic culture, it's like, just do what makes you happy. You are a subjective individual. Do what makes sense for you. And I know so many people who say that. They're like, in a relationship, prioritize yourself first.
Yeah, Douglas Murray said that we may not all be Christians, but we dream in Christianity. I would say we don't dream in Christianity anymore. We dream in postmodernism. We're all postmodernists. Even people like you and I who say we aren't postmodernists are postmodernists in some sense. But sorry, you said people say colloquially, take care of yourself first, and can't pour from an empty cup. In fact, it's so funny you say that, because if I could share my screen for a second, my on the essay I'm writing on love, I in fact have a whole section. Where is it? I can't find it. Yeah, great. If I could find okay, sorry, you keep going. I'll find the essay.
Yeah, no, it was mainly that, but it's the fact that we find it so hard to kind of conceive that I find interesting nowadays. And it's perhaps an overcorrection, because we used to live in a very much collectivist culture, right? Like, you identify with your nation, you identify with your family, you identify with your husband and your wife and whatnot. It's all collective. In our overcorrected
We now
For we are only me, it's only me, and we kind of struggle to take the stance of it's you and me in this together.
it's you and me. And in fact, I find this is a very Hegelian point, and I in fact wrote about this. A good example is Pride and Prejudice, where you have okay, I'll quickly explain that. So the idea is we don't find our subjectivity and our freedom just in ourselves. That's impossible. In fact, the words we just at a very plain example, even the words we speak really aren't our words. I didn't invent English. So our subjectivity is always found in the other. And in Pride and Prejudice, Jane Austen really portrays that, where you have I forgot their names. What are their names? The two characters. Catherine, right? Her name. No,
I haven't read it. I haven't read it, so I can't help you, unfortunately.
It's a good book, Pride and Prejudice. Let me find the names of the characters. Elizabeth, and what's his name? Elizabeth, and he says, "Ardently love you," and Darcy. So there's Darcy and there's Elizabeth. Darcy has to overcome his pride, and then Elizabeth has to overcome her prejudice to find and create this love with Darcy. But the idea is they have these stark class differences in Regency England, and Darcy has to overcome his ego and pride and be like, open up. In fact, this is a very cliche term, but he has to learn to open himself up to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth has to see beyond Darcy's pride and see that he is actually someone I love. And it's like in that act of creating this new worldview as they're building their project of love, they in fact also find their subjectivity. So you can't just be free in this sense. But now the previous thing I was going to say was that whole thing about what you were saying, take care of yourself first. My section in my essay, it's called "Love is Pouring from an Empty Cup." So it's saying that no, actually, when you're in love, you don't have to take care of yourself. Don't have to always take care of yourself first. There's an element where it's for the other person fully.
No, I like that. And it makes me kind of make the connection as well, which I think is something we don't see nowadays, is like our own personality is very much constructed like by the people around us, right?
Oh, totally.
There are cliche terms around this, like you are the average of the 5 people you meet.
Super
cliche.
Yeah.
Or like, so many variations of that. So we kind of acknowledge that's true in a business sense.
But the problem with that, even with that saying, is again, it's subsumed by neoliberal capitalism, because it's saying, be a high status person.
Exactly. It's hijacked.
What we are making is even more radical, that you as an individual would not exist if not for other people. You can't, who you are, the subject itself, your thought, everything can't exist if not for the other. As Lacan said, your desire is the desire of the other, or you want to know what other people are desiring. So
no, that's right. And I think you're right. Like it's the token hijacked by like business.
Self-help.
The fact that I think you treat this saying, you're the average of 5 people you meet, as a psychological statement. That's when you kind of get the crux of it, which is man or an individual is not made up of this person alone, his freedom of choice, and whatnot. It's very much you are your community, right? And it's this kind of brings me to like it's kind of more abstract now, but it's a theological statement, right? And in Christianity, it's very much the case that
Holy Spirit
man is the mediator of like forces, right? There's spirits, there's ideas and everything, but you're also kind of, you're part of a community, and part of a community is not
kingdom,
one in 100, right? It's like you're part of a community in a very spiritual way, in a very psychological way. I kind of conflate spiritual and psychological but so once I think we understand that, right, which is you are the container of much more than just yourself, then it's also kind of clear that you can see how the Christian idea that, what Solomon wrote was pride goes before a fall. You kind of overemphasize your own self, and you don't see the other parts of yourself that are acting on you. And you are careless with kind of your worldview, and you don't see all of this. You open yourself up to, consequences, right? And so I think very much the truth of like individual personality and, you know, subjective behavior is that it's very much extended from you to other people, right? Your desires are corresponding to them, are in relation to them. Your worldview is in relation to them. Language is in a
Universal,
relation
yeah,
to
to
them.
universal, yeah.
And so this is, I think, something that we like say now, but I think it's something we still don't really grasp on a cultural level, though, because, you know, we have the individual is always like, you know, I must do what's best for me, but me isn't just me. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, or you know,
Me is an amalgamation of the day, of the other, of the Dasein, to use Dasman, to use a Heideggerian term. But like, but you know, the thing there is though is that even like I would say, even though as you said, there are all these I don't know, maybe it's kind of like a Freudian slip. Maybe it's like we say these things like you are the average of the 5 people you are, because unconsciously we do know that. Or unconsciously it's there.
oh
And
yeah, 100%.
it comes out in different ways. But of course, then what happens is our hegemonic ideology captures that, and they're like, okay, no. That means you can get richer and take care of yourself by, you know, for example, man, certain terms like networking, godforsaken term. I hate that word, network. What does that even mean, man? Just go and say meeting people. What's bloody networking?
I agree
The
with you.
idea is, again, people are there as a network. I'm a node in a network, and I can use them to elevate myself in the social hierarchy, in the socioeconomic hierarchy. But perhaps this connects us. So I mean, I would say if all marriage was just that, it was power games, playing games in the socioeconomic hierarchy. Don't get married. Just sleep around. You know, take care of yourself. Yeah, I mean, yeah, if you get bored and lonely, as Camus said, then you probably get married. But that's not marriage for love. That's, for me, that's not even marriage. That's just being with someone because you're bored. It's a different thing.
Yeah. But then I guess there's also the, you know, the basically don't get married if you don't really understand what that means. But there's also the construction of the worldview that can include that, right? Because you kind of get married and then you realize over time what being a husband or a wife means.
That's
And that's
interesting.
also
Can you
that's
expand
also
on that? I
part of
never
the
thought of that.
development. It's
I
part of
never
the
thought of
development,
that.
I think, that the understanding of marriage happens within a marriage. That could very much happen. I think that happens for most people, actually. Right now, breath, because it's actually so much to talk about. But yeah, so I think it's like
That's a really good point, man. Do you want to elaborate a bit on that? That's a really good point. That it's like in retrospect we realize and learn what marriage.
Well, I think that's most people, right? And I think we're kind of anomalies in a sense because we're talking outside of it, and maybe we don't even get the essence of it because we're not in it, and we're just kind of talking superficially.
We're theorizing, we're analyzing. Yeah, I mean that's
we're theorizing, and I guess in a sense, perhaps when we actually get married, we can record an updated
yeah.
podcast. That would be interesting. with our wives maybe behind us, beside us.
Or eventually you and I end up getting married because we're gonna be, you know, we can never find
then it'll be the same.
we do the Camus thing, boredom, get married, whatever. Yeah,
basically. But so there is this, like, I just talking practically, there's so many people you've met, or at least I've oh, sorry, did you just lose me? Okay, sorry, I'm back. We all know people basically where those who have gotten married, where they always speak from experience, and they're like, you know, after I got married, I learned this about my wife. I learned this about my husband. I learned this about what marriage means. And my parents, I think, are very good examples of this, because I think when they both came into marriage, and they've told so many stories of this over my lifetime, but they're like, you know, when we came together, essentially, we had no idea of what marriage is, basically, and not their exact words, but, you know, they would come in with a certain expectation, with certain upbringing, and then they would come together and it would clash hard. And they would, you know, that's what it is, right? It's kind of the antagonism of two in constructing this world.
But building the worldview is an antagonism. It's not an
exactly. It's a struggle.
It's a struggle, absolutely.
It's a struggle, and that's why we speak of commitment and duty, right? Because this is where the usual worldview of do what makes you happy breaks down. Because you're never happy when you're in this struggle. It's something different entirely. And so, at least for my parents, it was in this struggle that they kind of toiled through it. I'd say, I don't know, because I'm not wasn't there at the time, but I don't to what degree the fact that they were both Christians and had this idea that marriage is something that should be worked through. I don't know how much that kept both of them together. I think 90%, if I'm like, I can get an updated answer from them. But what happens then is with this Christian idea of two become one, and they're both committed to making this happen, if as difficult as it was, supremely difficult, it's never just like roses, right? Where everything is just good and happens peacefully and sweetly all the time. You still commit, you argue, you fight, and over time you kind of reach a certain mediation of those kind of forces, and you're like, oh, all right, this is how, all right, sorry, apologies, this is.
I would even say that that's an infinite thing people do. Like it
is an infinite thing. It is an infinite thing, but I think it's very much
until the event of the love ends, you get divorced, or one person dies. There's an ending to love, right?
No, I think that's right. But I think that's right. I think what I'm speaking about here is very much kind of the coming of age of a marriage. It kind of comes into its own, and it's like, all right, marriage now becomes whole. It's not fragmented where one and one is like always tussling and like pulling at one side. It's like, okay, we get this, we are in this together. They can say this with full meaning, and they're like, now I love her, and that's what my dad always says. Now look, she's such a beautiful, lovely man. And it's a lovely thing, right? And I think I saw you write a very interesting thing on your newsletter before, and you're like your grandparents, I think, having like interactions between each other that like say nothing and everything at the same time.
Totally, man. It was a beautiful thing because like they're both senile. I don't mean that in a derogatory manner. Unfortunately, my grandpa passed away last month, so but they're both senile and they're really old, and that's okay. Thanks, brother. They're both really old. But absolutely, there was love in their marriage. I mean, I saw it even when I was a kid growing up in Sri Lanka. I could still see it because, again, it's not something you have to explain. What we're doing is, and we're weird guys. You and I, I don't know who the hell do things like this, where we are articulating what love and marriage is. It is something. It is something in your habits, your rituals, how you live existentially. That it, in fact, the work itself does the talking for itself.
Yeah. And it's like, it's the struggle itself that produces these, but then you kind of also like, there's beauty in the struggle, and that's something you realize over time.
Okay, I feel like now we're kind of like beating on a dead horse here. I think we agree both. So the socio-political implications, essentially, man, look, my thesis is quite simple. The reason I want to touch on that is because I think it's important, as in, if all marriage and love, or as you said, life itself is purely transactional, honestly, there's no reason for any of this. There's no reason for not even friendship, really. Just use people, if that's all.
Use people,
exploit them, get the best out of them, and it ends there. So all these things where you see again in these manosphere misogynistic podcasts where find be a high value man so you can attract high value women. If it's just a game like that in the sexual marketplace, and if you're gonna rank yourself, then just play that game and see where your life ends up. I mean, I personally would say your life would end up in a terrible place because you would never have true friends. You'd be miserable. But hey, each to their own, because we live in modernity. That's the miracle of it, right? Because in fact, you can do that. That's the thing. In modernity, you absolutely can do what these people are prescribing.
Well, this is the freedom. I think also the cultural rebellion that we're in right now is kind of each to their own.
Yeah,
and I think we're kind of rediscovering what it means.
Slowly going the other way around, though. I think we're shifting again, though.
I agree. That's what I was saying too. I think we went.
Okay. I understand.
And now we're kind of coming back to this. Hey, maybe there are interesting paths that are actually really good, and we call them wisdom. We call them like like there's all this don't
throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't throw the baby out.
Yeah. So in an interesting way, we're kind of rediscovering these pathways that initially we cast out, and then we were like, okay, this is kind of a similar direction, but it's authentic. And so that's also something I analyzed. But sorry, you go on.
Oh no, I mean no. I think that's the only point I really wanted to make. It's not even really an important. It's not really the substance of our conversation, But I think it's important, given that, again, as we said before, we are social creatures. So the socio-political milieu is the proper pronunciation. Milieu does matter, like how the zeitgeist of society does matter, and it affects who we are. So the other thing I'd like to discuss is, man, I would say that I think with the whole duty thing, for me, we have again, love for me has two parts: the fall, so kind of what I described with in Wuthering Heights, where it's just a violent imposition, uproots your life. But then the part of this kind of the ethical life, whatever you may call it, duty, commitment, that is the work of being in love and building this worldview. I would say being in love for me is higher than falling in love. We can, especially, mate, blokes like you and I mean, I see it. I mean, I fall in love quite easily. In fact, you know, I'm a softie. So like, but there's, it's, yeah, I mean, I know you also like that. Like, I mean, you know, 2-3 dates, she's my wife, you know, like, I fall in love really quickly. Because, I mean, you know, there's something to people, and especially when it's like a wonderful, pleasant person, there's like, what's not to love in some sense, right? And yeah, that's where I think the being in love comes in. So here's where I would like for us to, I think after this, at least from my end, everything that I kind of wanted to discuss, we've touched on, is where the idea of perfect imperfections come in. So what's your view of the idea of duty, commitment, being in love? But then why do you think love entails this almost paradox where it's not you love the person because they are the best out of the lot, so to speak, but you love them in some sense, yes, for who they are. And something you choose to do in some sense.
Yeah, no, this is a difficult problem, I think, and it's something I'm still figuring out, but I can, I guess, point to certain threads here and there. And also, sorry, while you're just mentioning what you mentioned, one of the phrases you had written before, I'm quoting you like half of the time. It's like, you're my favorite philosopher, man.
I'm my favorite philosopher too, because I'm an
That's the way, man. You're on the right track.
Hey, man, look, Nietzsche. You know what? Nietzsche wrote this book, right? Where's the book?
I am so smart. What is that? It?
Why I'm so clever, dude. I look like this too, man. Yeah. Sorry, man. I'm just being an idiot.
But you know, it's essentially, I think what you said was, it's not sex but love that needs liberation.
Yeah.
Right. And so what I got from that is kind of, you know, we spent all this time thinking about sex and liberating it. We've kind of gotten to this point where we've kind of successfully liberated it already.
Oh, totally.
But now there are consequences, and also like we don't really know what's happening. But I think love now is this kind of weird thing that no one really understands, and it kind of points to this whole discussion, right?
That was my point. And although I'm not saying when you say consequences that it's, in fact, I'm really happy that sex is liberated. I'm very
Let's say effects.
Although love is completely lost now. We don't talk about love anymore. There's that conversation. Any conversation about romance, any conversation about dating rarely involves love.
Because I could link the two as well, though, because like in my head, I'm like, you know, initially love and sex was one almost, like that's liberation of sex. Like especially in the Middle Ages, in a religious notion, you marry and then you have sex as part of the commitment to each other. And anything that happens outside of it is kind of I don't know, it's a sin. It's not right, right? And so I think right now love and sex has divorced, and with that we kind of mix. Like we kind of confuse ourselves with not knowing which belongs to which and what, like, you know, what each should be and how they should interact with each other. But yes, anyway, so earlier you were talking about duty, I guess, and like marriage and going from the aesthetic to the ethical.
And being in love.
Being in love, and contrasted to falling in love.
And I was connecting that to the idea of why love does entail this thing where it's not, you don't love the perfect thing or the perfect person.
Perfect imperfection. I think that's so where my head goes now, and it's something I've been kind of really interested in, is it's kind of a purely aesthetic thing to me, right? You ask me why is it richer to commit to something than just be hedonistic and do everything you like? And I guess this goes back to what I wanted to mention earlier, to expand on, you know, the idea that we find it much easier to commit to a passion project than to a person. I guess it came to my head right now that a rebuttal might be that the passion project doesn't talk back at you.
Correct, because the passion project is a completely solipsistic, almost equal.
No, I think that's right. It's just you. A passion project is an extension of you purely, right?
That's fine. That's beautiful. I mean, that people should do that. Beautiful. It's very important.
So I realized that, but I think what is so beautiful, it's kind of the higher aesthetic, kind of it pertains to the aesthetic of the universal. That's what I'm thinking about. So, you know, in this is Kierkegaard's idea, and this is something that I guess I've felt more than reflected on logically, right? But it's, you know, you encounter things hedonistically, you kind of get an aesthetic pleasure, and what that's characterized by is a pleasure in the immediate, right? Yeah. You know, you like get pleasure right now, like fast food, or fast food, you throw it away, you're done with it. And then that contrasts itself with the pleasure of duty, and that's the pleasure of the universal in being in contact with that which is kind of human, to use kind of a practice, like a more a common term, right? Like it's something that's human, it's something that's raw and that everyone can engage with. It's something that connects you with the heart of humanity itself. Yes. And that's somehow a higher beauty. That's why I guess falling in love, struggling in love is more beautiful than having sex with 10 people around you.
Yes.
Because somehow falling in love and being in love with one other person kind of takes love to its depth, takes the force to its depths. And somehow that connects you to the heart of humanity itself more than the purely bodily movements, right?
Yeah, I mean that which is particular becomes universal. It's a paradox.
Yeah. So in loving one another and loving another person and taking that to its kind of development, through its development and to its like later stages, you kind of experience the universal progressively in a very interesting way. You kind of unpack what it means more and more in like another person.
Yeah.
And, you know, in the same way we discussed earlier about, you know, you are the sum of the people around you. It's like you take on this person within yourself, and you kind of, you know, in a way, it's a pleasure of connecting to your own heart by connecting to another person's heart, because that's the universal factor, right? That draws you to like the depth of another. And I think that's really...
The thing is, when that happens, it's like, well, the beauty of that is, in fact, when that happens, in some sense, it doesn't matter if the other person, you know, till sickness do us part, right? As in the marriage vow, till sickness do us part. As in, it doesn't matter if the other person's a broken person, because you too are a broken person.
Yeah, no, that's right.
But then in the event of love and in the project of love, in fact, the brokenness itself is what allows that. I would argue. And my argument here is it's a Lacanian argument. And okay, I got this from Dr. Grace Tapi. She's a psychoanalyst and philosopher based in Perth, but we've been emailing. She'll be coming to Melbourne in a few weeks. So it's fantastic. But she says that Lacan is this thing where love is giving what you don't have to someone that doesn't want it. So that's where it comes in that what you said about we in the work of love, we connect to this depth in brokenness.
And the depth is brokenness. Yeah, I really like that. Yeah. And so that's to me, that is the universal factor.
Yeah. That is, oh my God, dude, what you just said right there is very, very Hegelian and Lacanian. The whole idea about Lacan is that we are all split subjects. We all have a brokenness. We all have a lack. And so when Lacan says we give to the other person what we don't have, we give the other person our lack. And why doesn't the other person want it? At first, that can be shocking. You're like, I don't want your brokenness, and I don't want to give you my brokenness. However, it's in the miracle of love where we both start to, okay, we confront the real. We both are broken. We both are split subjects. It's in that, in my view, as you said, we kind of approach some kind of universal some kind of universal aesthetic beauty, whatever you may call it. In fact, it is sublime because we haven't got words for it. It is a sublime.
Exactly. Yeah, it's very much it's a purely almost aesthetic phenomenon, right? It draws you.
Yeah, I think that's for me what perfect imperfections mean. It doesn't mean that it's not like a vulgar thing where I don't know, like you you want your partner to be broken and that's pathological. And then
Well, I think
that's
it's
ego.
like it's your partner is broken,
Yeah,
whether you're
the
like it or not.
thing is
And in that sense,
exactly.
it's her, or well, her, because I'm a man, but her brokenness that makes her human. Like that's the kind of contention around, like, I guess, I don't know, falling in love with an AI, because you
Yeah,
don't get that same raw feeling of brokenness. You're like, this human, this is kind of the whole argument, to bring us to another rabbit hole that we don't have to dig into, but
we can discuss it soon.
the whole idea of, like, AI versus human, what it means to be human. I think a lot of what it really means to be human, people get mixed up with the answers, because no one knows what it means to be human. But I think what is most human is the brokenness. It's the fact that one is broken, one is fragmented, there's the void, one is one is basically like has a tension with reality and has a lack. Lack is a great word.
Yeah.
And you don't have that sense with an AI. Like, and it's the same thing with, I think, also generated AI art pieces, right? Where
good point. That thing says we need to bring this in. A tension with reality. That's very important. Because we are broken, that, as you said, there's the tension and antagonism that's a part of the human subject. Anyway.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a subjective tension. And we don't have that sense in an AI, for example, right? And that's also that's why that's my opinion when I talk about, like, some people ask, is art and generated AI generated art the same thing? I'm like, no, even though they look the same, I might be fooled. But the fact is that if I know this is made by human and this is made by AI, I'm like, this carries more weight because it comes from a place of brokenness.
I concur.
You can say it comes from, like, it's the exact same contents, it's the exact same, like, it's the same thing with a human and a sex robot, I guess. Like, one that's as lifelike as possible. One can come at, like, look a 10 out of 10. Yeah. One is just
in fact, not look. I mean, of course, right? I don't know, flaws, as we all are. We have whatever flaws, ugliness here and there, small, out of shape, face is not exactly
whatever. And then the hedonistic self will, like, let's go for the 10 out of 10 because that's how you have the maximum pleasure and you have fun, right? But there's this deep depth, it's the beauty, profoundness of the universal that exists within a person when you interact with the brokenness, because you are both precisely broken in the same way. And then you kind of, I think it's so interesting. I'm kind of breaking my own mind here, but it's like when you interact with another person and fall in love and be in love with another person, it's almost like you're interacting with your own brokenness in a very interesting way.
Oh my God, that's very Hegelian. I mean, this is it, right? Because the idea of finding your own subjectivity in another person is that it is you see, and this is traumatic in some sense, you see your brokenness in the other person as she sees hers in you. But here's the thing, though. I would even argue, though, that, okay, I'm going to sound like a union here, but okay, I'm not going to say that, because if I was going to say to be a complete person, I don't think we're ever complete people, but I would say to live a life of substance and richness, and to have your life more edified, one must see that brokenness in us and in others. And Hegel would even argue in God himself. God himself is a split subject, but that's a different topic.
Talk about that's too much. But I agree with you. But that, to me, that's the essence of humanity, right? Yeah. And that's kind of the most profound thing, is not having sex with 10 people around you. That's kind of finding, little fragments of pleasure. It's pure, just bodily, as opposed to loving a whole in another being. Yeah, that's falling and being in love with someone for being a person. And what does being a person mean? It means being a universal being in the part, like within the particular that you connect with on a spiritual level. And that's, I think, the extreme profoundness of love. That's why when you fall in love with one other person, it subsumes everything else, because it's the universal. It's you encountering your own spirit, your own soul, really. And theological terms, it's you encountering God in another person.
You encounter God in the other. Yeah, totally.
You encounter God in the other.
Your fall is like an infinite. You fall eternally. because the person
Yeah.
itself is a lack. You're a lack. Look, man, I think unless there's anything else you want to add, I think that's a beautiful place to stop
Yeah.
at, because for me,
We
that's the argument. The argument is that we are split subjects. Therefore, we can't view marriage or love in this transactional way, because the irony or what's absurd about the matter is we have nothing to give. We're split subjects. So there's no reason for us to view love transactionally, because there's nothing to give. We don't in fact give anything in any positive, substantial sense. It's in fact more of something we work towards, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, 100%. And well, that also, I have this side idea, but it's like, it's why the Christian idea of marriage is so interesting, because it's kind of, it's a very fascinating idea to think of one broken being unites with another broken being, constructing towards a whole, and they're united under God. It's kind of the whole that kind of that comprises both of them in a way, and it's kind of a very interesting idea when you think about it symbolically. But
yeah, you need to build on that. You need to build on that. I think you need and build on that. All right, brother. I mean,
we can talk
man,
for
love you, man.
hours.
That was beautiful. That was beautiful. I'm getting a bit tired now, but I think we covered whatever we thought we were going to cover. It doesn't matter. It's just a chat, right? Yeah.
Well, it's the tension between what is covered and what is not covered.
And I think even the conversation itself, you saw how much you and I were struggling with this, right? To articulate our points.
Yeah.
That's just our lack of ability to communicate. But then also it's because there's a tension in these ideas itself.
Yeah. And it's kind of the beauty is in exploring and like interacting with the tension instead of doing away with it, right? It's also the same here as in marriage. But anyway.
Amen, brother. Amen.
Amen. Love you, bro.
Love you, man.